A US Army general stopped for gas, showed his ID, and still ended up in handcuffs, all because one officer refused to look past the surface. But what happened minutes later? No one saw it coming. Morris Ellington never liked drawing attention, even in uniform. He carried himself with quiet confidence. Not the kind that demands a salute, but the kind that calms a room. That Friday afternoon, he wasn't wearing stars or ribbons. Just a plain grey polo, jeans, and a hat from his alma mater Tuskegee. He'd just wrapped up a long morning visiting a VA center in Fayetteville, and was on his way back to Fort Bragg. But he decided to pull over for gas in Hope Mills, a small town just a few miles down the road. The sun was dipping behind the clouds. He parked his Dodge Charger at Pump 3, stepped out slowly, his back still stiff from old field injuries, and started filling up. He didn't notice the patrol car roll in from the side until the officer was already halfway out of it. "Sir, step away from the vehicle. Hands where I can see them." Morris turned, puzzled. The officer was young, maybe early 30s, lean, buzz cut, sunglasses still on even though the sky had started to dim. He had that overcompensating posture, the kind that tried too hard to command authority. Morris kept his hands up, calm. "Officer, is something wrong?" The man didn't answer right away. He circled around the car like he was checking a suspect for weapons. "You match the description of someone involved in a robbery reported 10 minutes ago." Morris frowned. "I'm sorry, I just left the VA center. I can show you." Step away from the car. Now, people had started to glance over. A mother wrangling her toddler from the backseat of an SUV stopped what she was doing. An older man leaned against his truck across the lot, watching. Morris took a slow breath. He wasn't interested in escalating anything, but he also wasn't about to let this slide without clarity. "I'm Major General Morris Ellington, United States Army. I'm not armed. I'd like to show you my military ID." Officer Ryan Stokes, his name badge barely visible, lifted his hand like a traffic guard. "I don't care what your name is, sir. Keep your hands visible." This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. Morris didn't move. "I'm not resisting, officer. I'd like to cooperate. Turn around and put your hands on the hood." A man had started recording with his phone from a few feet away. Morris could hear the low murmur of people whispering now. The woman with the toddler looked angry. The older man across the lot had pulled his phone out too. Morris looked at the officer one more time. "I'm asking you to check my ID. It will clear this up." But the cuffs were already out. And just like that, a man who had served in 3 combat zones, who had coordinated rescue missions, buried soldiers he mentored, and spoken at the White House, was now being frisked next to a gas pump like a suspect in a cheap crime show. A neighbor recognized him first. "That's General Ellington," someone said. "Are you serious right now?" Stokes barely flinched. "Back away." He barked at the crowd. "Do not interfere with police business." Someone else shouted, "That man runs the Veterans Fundraiser every year." But Stokes didn't listen. He tightened the cuffs, hard. Morris winced. But still, he stayed calm. There was no panic in his face. Only disbelief, disappointment. Not for himself, but for how small this man felt the need to be, just to feel powerful. But someone had just pulled into the lot. And everything was about to change. Deputy Raphael Boone had just finished dropping off his teenage son at a weekend STEM camp over at Grays Creek High School. He needed gas, too. That's why he pulled into the same station. At first, he didn't notice what was happening near Pump 3. His windows were up, music playing low, but the minute he stepped out of his pickup, he heard the shouting. He turned. A crowd was forming Point 3, maybe 4 people standing at a distance, phones in hand. At the center of it all was a tall black man, back to the officer, hands cuffed behind him. Boone squinted, his heart skipped. He recognized that voice, no mistaking it. He walked closer, slow, his hand resting lightly on his belt, not for intimidation, but out of instinct. As he approached, the voice became clearer. That measured tone. The weight behind each word. "I'm not a threat to you, officer. You're making a mistake." Boone stopped in his tracks. His mind flashed back to Iraq, to sandstorms and long nights on the radio. Back then, Major Maurice Ellington was the calm in every crisis. Boone had served under him during a brutal deployment near Baghdad. Ellington didn't yell. He didn't posture. He led with precision, respect, and focus. Now he was cuffed like a common criminal in a gas station parking lot. Boone stepped forward. "What's going on here?" he asked firmly. Stokes turned. "Keep back, sir." This is a police matter. Boone flipped his badge from his belt. Plainclothes deputy, Cumberland County. I'm Deputy Boone. Did I ask you a question? Suspect matches a description from a call. He refused to comply. Maurice turned his head slightly, squinting over his shoulder. Raphael. Boone blinked. General Ellington? Boone stepped up, eyes narrowing. You didn't check his ID. I said he matched. Boone cut him off. I don't care what he matched. Did you confirm who he is? Stokes looked like a kid caught lying in a classroom. He was acting suspicious. He's a major general in the US Army, Boone said, voice louder now. He's not some random guy. He's a nationally recognized officer. That man once led search and rescue missions when the rest of us were pinned down. Boone turned to the general. Sir, are you injured? No, just humiliated. Someone from the small crowd piped up. He offered his ID. The cop refused to look at it. Boone looked around at the growing audience, then back to Stokes. Uncuff him, right now. Stokes stood there, still holding on to a posture he hadn't earned. I was following protocol. You're 2 minutes away from being on the evening news. You hear them? Boone pointed at the phones. This video is going live. You're about to be a story. Stokes hesitated. He reached for the cuffs. Boone moved quicker. Let me. Back up. He pulled out the keys clipped to the officer's belt, undid the cuffs, and helped Maurice rub circulation back into his wrists. Thank you, Maurice said quietly. He looked at Boone, eyes steady. I'm all right, just tired of this. Stokes took a small step back, visibly sweating now. Boone didn't blink. You're gonna report this, right? Maurice shook his head. You know I'm not that kind of man. Boone sighed. I know. But I am. He walked over to the patrol car, pulled out his phone, and called a supervisor. Yeah, we've got a problem. One of yours just detained a high-ranking Army officer without cause. I've got it all on record. I'm gonna need a watch commander at the Shell on Camden Road. Now. The crowd started dispersing, but not before several people gave Maurice nods of quiet respect. A middle-aged woman mouthed, "Thank you." As she walked by, Maurice leaned against his car. For a second, he didn't say anything. Boone stood beside him. You all right? Physically, yeah. Mentally? Same answer. I've been treated worse in enemy territory, Maurice said. Then he glanced sideways. But I never expected this back home, not after all these years. Boone looked away, jaw set. You did the right thing, Raphael, Maurice added. You always did. But the fallout from this moment wasn't going to stay in that parking lot. Because someone had already sent the footage to the local news.b by the time Lieutenant Jody Rawls from the Hope Mills PD pulled into the gas station 15 minutes later, the mood was tense but controlled. Boone had kept Stokes at a distance. Maurice was seated on the hood of his own car, arms crossed, not out of anger, but composure. Rawls stepped out, adjusted her vest, and walked over quickly. She was in her late 40s, all business, no drama. She'd heard Boone's voice over the phone and knew it wasn't a call to brush off. Boone met her halfway. Lieutenant. Deputy Boone. What's going on? Boone glanced at Stokes, who stood a few feet away, arms stiff at his sides, avoiding eye contact. You've got a problem, Boone said. That officer detained a United States Army general on private property, without probable cause. Ignored identification, ignored witnesses. I was there. Rawls exhaled sharply through her nose and turned to Stokes. Officer Stokes, is that true? Stokes gave the standard answer. The subject matched a description. I was exercising caution. Did he resist? No, but. Did you check his ID? He offered it, but. But what? Stokes hesitated. I wasn't sure it was real. Boone raised an eyebrow. You mean you didn't like the way he looked? Be honest. Stokes bit the inside of his cheek. Rawls turned to Maurice. Sir, I'm Lieutenant Rawls. I want to apologize on behalf of our department. This should never have happened. Maurice stood, gave her a small nod. Thank you, but I'm not here for apologies. I just want to go home. Did I understand? May I speak with you privately? Maurice nodded again, and the two stepped a few feet away. Boone leaned against the passenger door, watching. He wasn't a stranger to racial profiling. He'd seen it in uniform and out. But seeing Maurice like that, calmly enduring, hands behind his back like a schoolboy being scolded, that was different back when they were stationed in Basra. Maurice once walked half a mile through open terrain under sniper threat just to check on injured troops. Not out of duty. Out of principle. That's who he was. Meanwhile, Stokes stared down at his boots like they were going to disappear. A few minutes later, Rawls returned. He's heading home. We'll be conducting an internal review. You'll be contacted for a statement, Boone nodded. She looked at Stokes. Go wait in your car.do, not say a word. He left without another peep. When Maurice walked back toward his vehicle, Boone opened the passenger door and motioned for him to sit inside. Wait here a second. Boone grabbed his phone again and hit record. He faced the camera head-on. His voice cleared at My name is Deputy Raphael Boone. Badge number 33102. I witnessed Officer Ryan Stokes detain a law-abiding citizen today. General Maurice Ellington, without cause. I intervened and confirmed the individual's identity, which should have been clear from the beginning. The officer disregarded standard procedure and ignored verbal identification. The incident was unnecessary, and I believe it reflected personal bias, not training. He ended the video and saved it. Just in case, he said to himself. As Boone got back in the driver's seat, Maurice looked over. You didn't have to put yourself on the line like that. I did, Boone replied. And I'll do it again. They sat in silence for a moment. Cars passed. The gas pumps beeped. The world kept moving like nothing had happened. You think this'll blow over? Maurice asked finally. Boone shook his head. Not this time. Someone sent footage to WRAL. I got the ping on my phone 5 minutes ago. It's already making the rounds. Maurice turned his gaze forward. Then let it. Boone nodded. You sure you're all right? I've been through worse. That's not the point. Maurice cracked a faint smile. I know. But while Boone drove away thinking the situation might stay local, the video didn't just stop at one news outlet. It was already in the hands of national reporters, and someone in DC had recognized Maurice to be why the time Maurice got home that evening, the video had already racked up over 100,000 views. He hadn't planned to turn on the TV, but his phone kept buzzing. Texts from former officers, calls from people he hadn't spoken to in years. A voicemail from an old friend now working at the Pentagon. He sat on his living room couch, remote in hand, debating if he even wanted to know how far the story had gone. On Channel 5, the clip played again. Him, hands behind his back, face composed, eyes locked forward like he was staring past the moment. Boone's voice could be heard, low and clear. You're 2 minutes away from being on the evening news. This video is going live. The news anchor paused before continuing. General Maurice Ellington, a highly respected U.S. Army officer, was wrongfully detained this afternoon by a Hope Mills police officer during what appears to be a case of racial profiling. The officer in question has been identified as Ryan Stokes, a recent transfer from Flagler County, Florida, where Internal Affairs confirmed he'd been under investigation for excessive force complaints. Maurice turned off the TV. He sat back, hands folded over his stomach. The walls of his home were lined with plaques, pictures, awards from Foreign Service and framed flags presented to him by units he once led. But none of that had mattered at that gas station, not one bit. Down the street, Boone had returned home too. He sat in his kitchen with his wife, Delia, who had seen the clip before he walked in. Did you know it would go this far? She asked, arms crossed, eyes tired. I knew it needed to. She didn't respond at first. Then, they'll come for you next. You know how these departments protect their own. Boone nodded. They can try. Later that evening, Boone received a call from Lieutenant Rawls. She didn't sound angry. She sounded tight, controlled. You're going to be contacted for an official statement, she said. The chief's been looped. IN.SO has the mayor. Understood, Boone replied. Ryan's been suspended with pay until the investigation is complete. Boone didn't react. Let me know when they're ready for my report. They'll call you in Monday. In the meantime, just be careful. Always am. Maurice, meanwhile, had received a direct message on social media from a journalist at a national news site, another from a military newsletter editor, one from a producer at CNN asking if he'd speak out. He didn't answer any of them. Instead, he opened his contacts and called one person. Colonel Everett Hall. Retired, Everett picked up on the second ring. Maurice. I saw it. You all right? I'm all right. There was a pause. Want me to make some calls? No, you sure? We both know this isn't about one officer. It's the way they look at us. Even now. I know. But that's not why I'm calling. Then why? Maurice looked up at the framed photo across from him. It was from his first command in Kandahar. 20 young faces, half of them barely old enough to vote. I want you to talk to someone, Maurice said. There's a deputy here. Boone. He stepped in when no one else would. He put himself out there. That man needs to be seen. Everett paused. You want to highlight him? I want people to remember what courage looks like. You sure you don't want the spotlight for yourself? I never did. The next morning, local newspapers picked up the story. So did military outlets. Within 24 hours, Boone's name was trending on Twitter. Some called him a hero, others called him a traitor to the badge. But Boone wasn't reading the comments. He was finishing his incident report, just as he'd done dozens of times before, except this time, he knew it would make waves. Meanwhile, Stokes was quiet. No statements. No press. No apology. But that silence wouldn't last, because while the internet debated, the chief of police had just received a sealed envelope containing a copy of Stokes' old disciplinary file. And it raised more than just questions. It raised alarms. By Sunday morning, the Hope Mills Police Department was cornered. What started as a local embarrassment had turned into a national headline. Civil rights attorneys were weighing in. Military veterans had organized an online petition demanding accountability, which had gathered nearly 50,000 signatures in under 36 hours. And the footage? Well, the footage had taken on a life of its own. News stations were looping it, talk shows were dissecting it. Everywhere you looked, there was that image. General Morris Ellington, standing tall, wrists shackled behind him, refusing to lose his composure. But behind the scenes, the pressure wasn't just coming from social media. It was coming from inside the house. That sealed file on Officer Stokes? It came from his old department down in Flagler County. It contained 37 pages. Use of force complaints. 2 excessive detention cases. 1 internal memo recommending psychological evaluation. No formal charges had ever stuck. But that wasn't unusual. Departments often shuffled troubled officers off quietly, avoiding lawsuits by letting them resign instead of terminating them outright. Hope Mills hadn't bothered to read the fine print when they hired him. But now they had no choice. Lieutenant Rawls sat across from Chief Brandon Holcomb in his office, the door shut tight. Holcomb was in his 60s, a man who'd always valued loyalty above all else. But this time, he didn't have room to protect anyone. We brought this on ourselves, he muttered, reading through the report for the second time. He shouldn't have been cleared for field duty. Rawls didn't argue. Holcomb sighed. We know how the file got leaked. No. But it's real. There's a signature. Dates match, nothing forged. The chief leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. We'll issue a statement by noon. You think that'll stop the bleeding? No. But if we don't, the mayor's going to cut us loose in front of a camera. Back at home, Boone sat at the dining room table with his laptop opened. He'd received 3 interview requests. All declined. He wasn't interested in being famous. He just wanted the truth to be acknowledged. Delia brought him coffee, sat across from him, they digging into the officer. Boone nodded hard. You worried? He shook his head. No, I didn't lie. I didn't exaggerate. I told them what I saw, what everyone saw. Meanwhile, Maurice stayed quiet. He hadn't made a public statement, despite the pressure. A few journalists had camped outside his driveway early that morning. One even knocked. He never answered. Instead, he pulled on his army jacket and drove to the Veterans Center. No fanfare. No speeches, just time spent with old friends who didn't see rank. They saw a man who always came through. Inside the center, a young vet named Calvin approached him. He couldn't have been older than 26. Sir, he said quietly. I saw the video. I showed it to my dad. He served too. He said it hurt to watch, but it felt familiar. Maurice nodded once, slowly. Sometimes the uniform doesn't shield you from what people think they see. Calvin looked down. You think anything will change? Maurice took a moment. Then he said, maybe not today, but sometimes the right moment forces the right eyes open. Elsewhere, Stokes sat alone in his apartment. The curtains were drawn. His phone had been taken by Internal Affairs. His badge, too. Word had spread fast among the department. Some colleagues were quiet. A few had sent him short, clipped messages. Not cool. You messed up, man. He kept replaying the moment over and over again. Why hadn't he just taken the ID? Why had he pushed? But deep down, he knew why. He'd sized Ellington up in a second, made a call. Treated him like every other fit the description profile he'd justified before. Only this time, the person he judged wasn't some nameless face. He was someone with a voice, a history, and the discipline to let the world see it all. But things weren't done spiraling. Not yet. Because on Monday morning, the DA's office would open a formal inquiry into whether Officer Ryan Stokes had broken the law, and the answer wouldn't be favourable. The District Attorney's office didn't waste time. By 8:45 a.m. Monday, a formal inquiry had been opened, and by noon, DA Celeste Morton held a quiet but firm press conference at the courthouse in downtown Fayetteville. No dramatic podium. No big speech. Just facts. After reviewing body cam footage, civilian recordings, and multiple witness statements, she said, "Our office is moving forward with charges against Officer Ryan Stokes, including false imprisonment, unlawful detention, and obstruction of justice." It hit the airwaves like a lightning bolt. Stokes was taken into custody later that day, booked without ceremony and released on bond. Reporters were waiting at the courthouse exit, but he kept his head down and said nothing. His lawyer issued a brief statement, blaming media pressure and insisting Stokes feared for his safety. Though nothing in the videos supported that claim, Morris didn't celebrate. He didn't comment. He didn't need to. The truth was already out there, and that was enough for him. Instead, he returned to his normal routine. Morning walks, short drives to the base. Coffee at the diner on Ramsey Street, where the waitress didn't treat him like a symbol, just a regular. He did agree to speak once, at the Veterans Center the following Friday. Word had gotten around, so when Morris arrived, the room was full. Not cameras, just people. Old soldiers, young enlistees. Local families. Some had never met him, others knew his full military record by heart. He stood near the window, nothing flashy. No script.no paper in his hand. Just his voice. "I didn't plan on being the face of anything," he began. "I've spent my career trying to solve problems quietly, behind the scenes. But something happened in that parking lot that wasn't about me. It was about all the people who don't have cameras recording when they're misjudged, all the people who can't pull out a badge or a rank to stop it." The room was still. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the way people were holding their breath just a little. "I was lucky," he continued, "because Raphael Boone was there, and because someone pressed record. That shouldn't have to be what saves you. But that's where we are." He looked around. "If you serve your country, you don't do it for praise, you do it because it matters. Because people matter. The person in front of you, who they are, not who you assume they are. And if we forget that, if we let fear and pride run the show, we lose more than dignity. We lose each other." When he finished, no one clapped at first. Not because they weren't moved, but because it felt too real for applause. Boone was standing in the back, arms folded, watching quietly. When Maurice made eye contact with him, Boone gave the faintest smile. Just a nod of respect, nothing more. Later that day, Boone received a call from a senior liaison at the state's Office of Police Standards. They were organizing a leadership panel for officers across counties to address profiling and misconduct, and they wanted him to be part of it. "You willing to speak to a room full of cops?" the liaison asked. Boone answered without hesitation. If they're willing to listen. Meanwhile, Stokes had gone silent. No media appearances. His union representation refused interviews. He was suspended indefinitely without pay, and the court date was set for the following month. The community had moved on, but not completely. At the diner on Ramsey Street, someone had taped a photo of Maurice next to the counter, just him in uniform, smiling. No caption. Didn't need one dot. And back at the Veterans Center, Calvin, the young vet, started volunteering weekly, helping new service members adjust after deployment. He told Maurice, "That day at the gas station, it changed something for me, made me want to stand taller." Maurice just gave him a light pat on the back. "Then make sure you're standing for the right things." But the story didn't really end there. Because what happened in that parking lot had already planted a seed in people's minds. And what they did with it would define what came next. 3 weeks later. The viral clips had slowed down, the headlines faded, and the frenzy moved on, as it always does. But the memory hadn't. At Hope Mills High School, a civics teacher used the video of General Ellington's detainment to open a discussion about assumptions and authority. The students, mostly quiet at first, began to open up. One boy said his father had been pulled over 6 times in 2 months. A girl said her uncle, who served 2 tours in Afghanistan, still gets followed around in department stores. The teacher didn't say much. She let the clip speak for itself. Elsewhere, Boone had begun leading those departmental sessions. It wasn't glamorous. Just a group of officers, some skeptical, some open-minded, sitting around a conference table, chewing over real scenarios. The first few meetings were tense. A few officers rolled their eyes. One walked out, but others stayed. They asked questions. They brought up old incidents. They looked uncomfortable. And that was the point. Boone didn't preach. He told the truth. When you wear this badge, he said in one session, you carry more than power, you carry the burden of judgment. If you're going to judge, you better be right. Because one wrong decision doesn't just mess up paperwork, IT messes up lives. One young officer approached Boone after a session and said, I didn't know who General Ellington was. I probably would have done the same thing Stokes did. Boone looked at him for a second, then asked, would you have asked for ID? Yeah. Then maybe you wouldn't have. Back at the Veteran Center, Morris had returned to his usual volunteer hours. He'd politely declined every national interview. He didn't want to become a hashtag. He didn't want to be praised for being composed. That wasn't the story. One afternoon, a reporter from a military journal showed up unannounced. She was young, respectful, clearly nervous. I just wanted to ask you one thing, she said. Why didn't you speak out more publicly? Morris smiled softly. Because this wasn't about being seen. IT was about being reminded. We forget how fast perception can replace truth. 1 second I was a citizen. The next I was a suspect. IT had nothing to do with what I did, and everything to do with what he assumed. She scribbled it down. So what should people take away from it? He thought for a moment. Then, that authority doesn't always come with wisdom. And that being calm in the face of injustice isn't weakness. It's control. I don't need people to admire me. I need them to look inward. The reporter nodded, thanked him, and left. Later that evening, Boone joined Morris for dinner. 2 old soldiers. No fanfare, just food and quiet conversation. You know, Boone said, putting down his fork. If you had pushed back that day, if you'd raised your voice or even pulled out,